Excited to be here for the second meeting.
Hi,
Thanks.
everybody.
Hi, Mama.
Hi, Corey.
Hey, Livia.
Hey, hi, Olivia. Hi, Moses.
Hello.
Hey,
Good
Pam.
morning.
Hey,
Hey,
Jimmy.
Hi.
Jim and Nance.
Jim and Nance.
Well, hey, I figured we'll since last time I talked to everyone's ears off, that we could have more of a discussion today. I know we had some readings last time to parse through ahead of this, so I didn't want to dominate the conversation. I kind of want to just maybe go in order, a certain order, and kind of start with and I'll share my screen, the 1983 article in the Sun Times,
Okay.
talked about last week, which really kind of gives, what is really, for lack of a better phrase, just, this is the conspiracy theory. I know that phrase it has a very negative connotation, but technically this is a conspiracy theory, a theory of, conspiring, which I find to be extremely compelling in reading here. And just as you kind of look through the different evidence that led to this article, and also, was born out of this being published. So this is, like I said, from the Sun Times. These were two seasoned crime reporters that did a weekly column on Sundays, and just all of a sudden published this in July of 1983. And so really is a bombshell in terms of this case, almost 20 years after the fact, coming out and saying that these stories were, quote, verified, that this happened. I also have done some research into these folks here, Martin Tajra and Sam Felici, and also their time in prison with Michael LaJoy and Joseph DiArgento, which actually there's a lot of information about. So I figure we could just read through this here. It was 19 years ago, on March 19th, 1964, that a heroic 26-year-old clerk was slain while trying to thwart a holdup of Sears Roebuck store in Niles. Tape-recorded testimony that points to two underworld figures, Joseph DiArgento and Michael LaJoy, as the likely killers of the young clerk Terrence Chase Illigan, has been turned over to us. But no effort was made to prosecute them, apparently because the old FBI of the J. Edgar Hoover era was more interested in using the pair as informers to convict a motley array of robbers than in pursuing the murder case. And convict the motley array of robbers is kind of what we discussed a few weeks ago with the 1968 trial. This came at a time when the FBI was hungrily working to impress the public by scoring convictions against crime syndicate gangsters. This is how it all came about. And John Shields was then Midwest security chief for Sears, took tape-recorded statements from two county jail inmates that pinpointed DiArgento, LaJoy, and the late Guy Loverboy Mendola. So Loverboy Mendola is another character person that will, be important in this story, as the Sears robbers. Sam Felici and Martin Tajra told Shields. So again, Shields worked for Sears. Was actually at the Gulf Mill Mall that day and was doing his own kind of investigatory, pursuit of finding out what happened to Terry after the local police sort of stopped their investigation for all intents and purposes. So I know this is a lot of different people, but if you have to stop me for questions, go ahead. Sam Felici and Martin Tajra told Shields and DiArgento, a fellow inmate, had boasted openly to them of joining with LaJoy in the killing when Zilligan tackled one of the robbers during a $52,000 holdup. The inmates also said DiArgento boasted that he and LaJoy later killed Loverboy Mendola because he had panicked as the driver of the getaway car after the Sears slaying, and they feared he might inform about the murder. And so goes a little bit more into that. So I think the bottom line here is important. That this was published. DiArgento and LaJoy, while enjoying a pass in the Sears case, were used extensively by the FBI as informers to gain federal convictions against a group of mostly lower and middle echelon underworld figures that would include Richard Kane and William Dodano as well. When last heard from, DiArgento and LaJoy were under the wing of the Federal Witness Protection Program. So following this article, the family actually met with John Shields. I believe Mary Lally actually called Art Patak here. So poor Art Patak was, really under the gun there. I'm sure she just laid into him and said, where are you getting all this? And he put her in contact, and the family in contact with John Shields, and they had actually had a sit down in 1983 at his house about the tape, etc. So,
Wow, that's nuts. Do you know anything about that conversation?
Yeah, I actually have part of it recorded. And so
Okay.
I have a transcript of that conversation
right.
house
Okay.
in LaGrange, and it's very convincing. So he played the taped interviews of the two Cook County Jail inmates to the family, and then they had a conversation about it. Was
So
really
you have the recording of that conversation about the recording. And you have both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I only have one of the two jailhouse recordings.
I sent the other one. So I was given those tape recordings that night. And one was Martin Tajra, one was Sam Felici. The Sam Felici recording was clearer, more audible. So I sent that to Tommy Z, to Uncle Tom, because he hadn't been able to be at the meeting. Jimmy was there, Bobby was there, I believe Dick was there. And because Tommy wasn't able, I sent that to him. And then much later, when Tom Benedetto started to work on this, we tried to retrieve that tape, asked them to look for it. It couldn't be found. But the Tajra tape, Tom worked extensively with, and it may have had better actual content in it. It was harder to hear. But one thing I wanted to say about that conversation at the Shields house, at Mr. Shields' house, was that it didn't lead to anything. It was yet another kind of opening into like a view opening into the, murder of Terry, and everybody looking at it and then just not knowing what to do with it, right? Which is why, since Tom, my Tom, has started this research, I personally have found it very freeing and very liberating, because finally, Aaron Light is getting into this tangled, dark situation. And somehow, just being able to name things, just being able to see things is incredibly, or can be incredibly healing. I don't think we are, trying to solve a mystery and be done with it or anything like that, but it's seeing into, with light finally, into this dark cavern of pain that has really been unapproachable. So really, what can you do with a story that, first of all, is so horrifying and so like, oh my God, what, if he'd only had a flat tire on the way to work, if he'd only taken an earlier lunch break, if blah, 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 all that stuff. And then 20 years later, 19 years later, you find out that, oh, the way the government works is that they use, criminals to convict other criminals. And then, what do you do with any of that? So, again, that's why this to me is just so important. And that's to me what real justice is.
And I think just going off probably for you, Mom, like talking about or figuring out the why, like why that happened. Maybe not just from like a lack of knowledge or a laziness that I think was maybe like portrayed as the reason, or like, oh, we just can't figure it out, but there was an actual reason why nobody was convicted. Just because and it says it in the article
Yes.
of the like this era when they wanted to get as many guys in the outfit as possible to show the public that they were like, locking
Yes.
down on this activity, was a big like cultural thing that was happening. And so they just used this murder, 'cause he was a working class man, and it wasn't going to be highly publicized maybe, as something to their advantage, which is kind of sick.
Yeah. 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 That's right.
Yeah.
And so we all
on that
just
point-
lived with that kind of like, oh, who knows? They'll never figure it out. Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm trying to get my arms around this. So they have mobsters, connected guys doing this murder of a completely innocent citizen, and yet they're going to use these guys as informants to go after mobsters who were burglars, which is the difference between night and day on the criminal scale. I'm trying to grasp
Yeah.
the logic in that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I feel like when they say motley array here, I'm trying to remember where that is, a motley array of robbers. There were a few defendants in that 68 case who were nobodies. There were at least, I would say, 3. The other folks who were defendants in that trial that were being prosecuted were one of an underboss in the suburbs who ran the juice loan syndicate in the suburbs named Willie Potatoes Dodano. He was convicted in that. And also Richard Kane, who was really the key person that the government in 68 wanted to prosecute. And we're about to get deeper into the conspiracy here. So Richard Kane once worked for Richard Ogilvie. Richard Ogilvie in 1968 was running for governor as a Republican. The prosecutor who developed this case and brought the indictment was Ed Hanrahan, who was a Daily Democrat. Ed Hanrahan was also running in 68 for state's attorney. There's a political aspect of this that's very important. I think it's not so much that they were just trying to get other burglars. They were trying to score headlines that, hey, Ogilvie's guy, Kane, did all this, and the Democrats put him away. You want this Republican guy as your governor? Look who he hired to, head some of his units as sheriff.
Look who he trusted, and how could you trust him if he's going to trust?
So there was a big leaflet campaign against Ogilvie, trying to tie him to Richard Kane in 68. Ogilvie was Teflon, though. Absolute Teflon. People loved Ogilvie. I mean, obviously, look at the train station is named after him today. They loved him. He had a proven track record. He was not a typical politician. He won the governorship anyway in 68, which makes this all the more tragic. I mean,
Honestly,
the political tactic did not work by any means. But that is really kind of the nuts and bolts of that entire conspiracy, is that it becomes this political, mechanism to help out the Daily Democrats in 68. And you've got Hoover involved at the national level. You've got these daily appointments. Obviously Hanrahan was an appointment of President Lyndon Johnson. So there's a lot of politics going on there. The thing that is so bizarre about the trial, and I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago, and this is a very long-winded answer, Jim, so stop me anytime, apologies, but is that these guys, Mendela, LaJoy, D'Argento, Shang, they did this robbery in Franklin Park 6 months before Gulf Mill Sears. They held up a bank in a very violent way. They all got caught. They all went to the federal penitentiary. But then the government was like, okay, we're going to basically take that conviction, undo it, give them a pass on that if they come out and testify against the people who helped them cover up that crime. So you could, in that logic, you can do a crime, you can hold up a bank as long as you're willing to, rat on those who helped you cover it up if they have, some political, power. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it.
Tom, can you remind me again of Kane's relationship to LaJoy and these other people?
Yeah.
Was he half Italian or was he half a mob? Remind me again from a couple weeks ago.
It's a good question. They definitely knew each other. So Richard Kane was the head of the Cook County Special Investigations Unit. And as we do some more reading, it will make a lot more sense. And I've really hashed out, his history, their history together in the manuscript. So that will become more clear. But his relationship to them is that he ran the lie detector tests on them coming out of that Franklin Park bank robbery. They got caught really quick. They were like, who's the rat? Everyone's going to take a lie detector test to figure out who's the rat. Whoever fails the lie detector test is going to get shot. So Richard Ogilvie, even while he was working in the sheriff's office, on the private side, on his off hours, was running this lie detector.
You mean Richard Kane, not Richard Ogilvie?
Yes, I'm sorry, Richard Kane. So while Kane was working for Ogilvie, he was doing this like side business where he was running lie detector tests, and one of his clients was the outfit. So pretty backwards. But Richard Kane was definitely like a double dealing guy. He, would go to work at the sheriff's office and help, cover up stuff for the outfit, and, be out in the press as this sort of law enforcer, lawman guy. He was really something. And that's why I'm really excited for you guys to just read about him at all, because he is an absolutely
He's fascinating. There's no question. Yeah.
And terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely sounds like a movie character, right? Like if you were gonna write a movie about the mob, he's the exact person you would want for your story.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is crazy that he's part.
Right.
Yes. Yes. And yeah, I would fall down that rabbit hole, but it would take up so.
Now, did Richard Kane then further assist the perpetrators in Terry's death? Did he help them get away with it?
There's definitely some evidence of that I lay out in part 2 of the manuscript. So we will kind of get there. I don't want to jump ahead
Okay,
much
okay.
because there's a lot of building blocks that
Okay,
you should know about. The way that I've tried to organize and develop the manuscript is that you have kind of a whole history of these people and their careers and their
okay,
backgrounds, and then when they all start to converge, you can really understand what they're bringing to those different dynamics.
got it.
And so you've got, I think you remember, Mom, about like when they arrested D'Argento and Painsco, and Richard Kane, one of Richard Kane's guys, was there, just Johnny on the spot. It was in the police report. We'll talk about that later, but
Okay, okay.
yeah, there's some connections there that you have to draw your own conclusions, but once you kind of see it, you're like, what's
Mhm.
going on there? So
So one other thing is that if we go back to the cover up that Patek and Hugh Huff, in their 1983 article, that they got that information obviously from John Shields. So if we go back to that and the mention of J. Edgar Hoover and the corruption and the fix going all the way up the line, right? And God knows how far it went even beyond Hoover. Um, what why did they want Richard Kane so much, or Dodano? I mean, people obviously didn't, they were trying to convince the public that Richard Kane was bad at the same time as they were risking everything to convict him. Well, I don't even understand why they made that selection. Like, yeah, this is going to help us, because if this had been uncovered at the time, there would have been, Illinois could have reverted, against, or whatever, reacted against the Democratic leadership for a long, long time. I just don't know. I don't know why it was just like such an obvious thing for the whole Democratic chain of command to say, yes, if we get Kane and Dodano, even with these, immoral means, it'll be good for us. I don't know.
politics. Yep, that's politics. It's
Okay.
it's all about the headline grabs and being able to, say, hey, look who I put away. You have to remember at this time, so the FBI was transitioning from going after communists for years and years and years
Uh-huh.
to transitioning to, okay, what's our new domestic enemy? Okay, it's organized crime. Before that, they were really not doing much about organized crime, which is why it kind of got out of control to the point where it did.
Yeah.
Uh, and now at that, in the early 60s, they were embarrassed by the outfit when they first started going after them. Embarrassed. They were bringing prosecute or indictments on the outfit, and these guys were slippery as heck. They had the best lawyers. They could not be, tamed. So they ended up, this was one of the biggest wins they had. It probably was one of the biggest, until the 70s and 80s, when people really started going away in the mob. They started getting them on, like, RICO and all that. These were big convictions, but
Okay.
did
So
they
they
do
seem
difference? Not really.
smaller, but they really, this was a big deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never get that. And so that helps. Yeah.
Um,
Tom, you know the cork board that you have at your house with all the characters and everything? Do
yeah.
you think make like a character list or something, or it's just helpful. There's just so many names, and we will get them, but just for like the beginning stages of how, like, because we're getting to know everybody, do you think you could send out something like that with like a face and a little description of each person?
Yeah, I could try if that'd be
I think it's
helpful.
like moot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I could try if that would be helpful. I think the way, yes. If
Yeah.
that becomes something that's definitely needed, I will, because I know there's so many people involved in this.
Yeah.
I tried to structure it as like it's sort of like the rest of part one, which we'll read for next month, is like
Mm.
just a soft intro to all these other people, and then like you will start to, hopefully the way it's organized, kind of understand who's who. But it's a lot. And again, with all these different people and everything that they've done, it's another reason I'm so excited we're all meeting, because I'm like, okay, now you guys know who they are, so I don't have to
Right.
think about it.
And they seem to almost cross sides too. I mean, not totally, but like Richard Kane is a perfect example. Because then all of a sudden in 68, he's pointing at LaJoy on the stand going, doesn't anyone care that he's the one who murdered Terry Zilligan? He's saying that out
Right.
loud.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
you're like, where is he in this? He's a bad guy, a good guy, a third, what is he? So that
You
would
could
be
tell,
great. Yeah.
everyone could tell that my mom's been reading ahead. She's on part 4.
I'm the kid in class who read
Our
ahead.
class, teacher's pet. I have to go, everyone, because I only get a 30-minute lunch break of a 12-hour shift, so I have to go.
Is
But
that
love you all.
illegal?
No, it's not.
Could be.
Yes, exactly.
All
All right.
right.
Well,
Thanks, Kai.
you,
Love
babe.
you.
Bye,
bye, guys.
Bye, Carla.
See you
Bye.
tonight,
Bye, Carla.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Why
So I don't know
don't
if this is getting too ahead, but the 1968 trial, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that was all about, because it kind of is like highlighting Kane as this double agent kind of guy. But what were the charges, and were they brought directly against Kane, or was it more of an overall thing against the entire like syndicate?
Yeah, that's a great question, Olivia. So by the time the 68 trial came around, Kane was already kind of in disgrace a little bit. He had been fired by Ogilvy. He was looking for work. He was kind of on the outs. He was discovered pretty swiftly. He spent quite a bit of his early career building his way up to be this double agent, and then it only took 5 or 6 years by the time he was convicted to really have that dream die. So he this same crew of robbers is really like a core 4 to remember. So LaJoy, DiArgento, they're named in here. Patrick Shang and Loverboy Mendola. They are supposedly the 4 that were at Gulf Mill Sears when Terry died. They also were the 4 6 months previously at a bank robbery in Franklin Park. When they successfully robbed that bank, but then the government was at their door like the next day. It was like, so they were immediately like, somebody ratted, because the funny part is they just thought they were geniuses. Whether that's funny or not, I don't know, that they could never be caught. But there was evidence everywhere. They were so sloppy with the bank robbery that of course they got caught. Well, instead they were like, well, couldn't have been us. It must have been someone was a rat. So their boss, those 4, their boss, who signed off on all their bank robberies, all their burglaries, and they would kick him a chunk of each one, was Willie Potatoes. So he's the big boss in the suburbs. They're taking orders from him. When they come to him and say, we think there's a rat in our crew, he calls Richard Kane, because he's higher up, and Richard Kane is a made man. He's higher up. He's the top boss's guy. Sorry if it's a lot. And now I'm running out of hands here. But he calls Richard Kane, we need these guys to have a lie detector test, find out who's ratting. That kind of spirals out of control, and kind of see how that takes place later. If you continue reading, it's eventually LaJoy and all of them were in jail. They were in the federal penitentiary, and the government approaches them and says, who can you help us take us down? I know you don't like your time here in jail. Who can you help? Like, who can you help us take down some of these guys? Richard Kane, Dodano, And they're like, yeah. So they end up being informants for basically the cover up of their own crime, which it just doesn't sit right for many reasons. So it's a hard thing to really describe and get into, but it's a really good question. It's the 68 trial is a huge inflection point in this whole story. So I'm glad we're kind of at least giving a preview of it now. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation.
Of course.
You know, I have to say, reading through all of this, it strikes me how selfish all of these people are. I mean, no one's really in it to find the truth or what happened, you know, or bring justice. It's really about what move do I need to make to, you know, gain more power, to get a better job, to look good in the press, whatever it is. It's all these personal things that are motivating them. Nothing about, we got to get the bad guy, right? Like, and that's what you think when you think of law enforcement. Like, these are people who are there to get the bad guy, and it seems like,
Right.
maybe that's not the case.
Right. And even within the outfit people, even within the perpetrators, it's not about loyalty. It's not about, you know, whatever kind of, you know, rough justice it's about how can I survive and everybody else can go to hell, you know?
Yeah. No, it's very selfish.
Yeah.
Very. Which doesn't surprise me, because they're criminals, right? Each one of them. If you're in the syndicate, you're a criminal by definition, and those things
So on both sides, you know, it's just about that. And then we have this murder, as Jimmy said, murder of an innocent citizen, an innocent civilian that has repercussions to this moment while we're all here on Zoom, right? That has repercussions forever, as every death does, arguably, but certainly every unjust death has repercussions. And that is kind of the collateral damage.
It is. And it's the collateral damage that no one seems to be, who's in the system seems to be concerned about.
Right.
And you would think that they would be.
Right. You know, and that's kind of why I went on and on at the beginning of this meeting saying, because of that, even, you know, our current great efforts on the part of Tom, and then leading, you know, the family and friends in this way is so important, because this was just sidelined. And then we were left with, you know, these really insufficient and even damaging pieces, like, oh, he was a great hero, or, oh, you know, he was a great sports person, and all this, you know, which, okay, but it's not enough. It doesn't speak directly to, you know, to imagining him there, to imagining his life. And you know, in part 1, chapter 1 that we had for today, Tom is inhabiting Terry and Mary's life in Villa Park that morning. And, you know, that has not been done.
And I think it's a great point too, Peggy, where it's like, so there are so many ambitious men who took advantage of this crime, so many, and that's the tragedy. And I will say, like, this is not a rose-colored glasses manuscript by any choice. I mean, I'm laying all that out. It is extremely tragic what happened, and it doesn't end well either. I mean, you know, it just continues on and on.
There's no happy ending here.
Yeah, what I do love is that there is, you know, there is Terry, right? There's Terry at the center, and the goodness that he represented is unfortunately, it's not offset, but it does balance all of these men. Then there's John Shields, who I think is just one of my heroes in all this. Like he is
Exactly.
really, really somebody who, look, he works in private. He was private sector security. Okay. So he had no political connections. He had no agenda other than getting this solved. It happened. He fell on his watch. This happened on his watch.
Mm-hmm.
The Sears robbery was a result of several security loopholes that were taken advantage of. He took it personally,
Mm-hmm.
and for 20 plus years
Yep.
was pursuing these different, investigations. And he did some other things too, which is amazing. Like he hired some private police detectives to try to continue to look through this over the years. There's not a lot about that. We don't have like any dossier that he put together or anything, but really just a good salt of the earth man. And
Yeah.
when you like, it's tough to kind of read about all these people who are so self-absorbed and political, but then you have like at least Terry and Shields.
Yep.
And even Ogilvy, who really honestly is pretty similar, other than being a politician, that are luckily a little bit of a salve for the overall story of just consistent wounds, consistent
Yeah.
digs. I did want to get into that too, and talk a little bit about the portrait of a dead hero article as well, and just hear what everyone's thoughts are on that. And obviously, just scrolling and sharing my screen, first impression is this is a massive article. I mean, this is a spread about Terry and the family and the crime. Truly shows just how magnanimous this crime was. And this is 3 months to the day after the murder this was published. And so people are still thinking about this 3 months later, continues on and on after that too. But really quite a this was really quite a source for me as a researcher, but it's really, I think, just amazing that we have it as a family. And speaking of too, got a fun surprise here. I have hard copies of it as well, which is great. So if anybody ever wants one, have them. In the front is President Johnson's on the front of that Chicago Tribune piece. This is the actual edition. There he is. And open it up. I should have marked what page it was. I'm sorry, but yeah, I have, I think, 5 editions of this, and here is the actual article. So somebody saved these, but
Those are grandma and grandpa's.
oh, okay, grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
So I have them if anybody wants, a hard copy. I have like 5 or 6. Oh, and what else is in here is the Tajra tape. So there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just wanted to hear anyone's thoughts on just kind of this article and let you guys kind of discuss if there's any takeaways from this. Obviously, other than it being just really hard to read this, it's very difficult to read about the crime. Even, as I've been doing this for years and years, it never gets easier to read about. Don't all speak at once. That's fine. And I know, look, I know it's difficult.
I'll speak. I'll say that this is more than most murdered people's families have. But on the other hand, this is all we have.
That's really poignant.
I mean, even that, nothing.
Yeah. It's very detailed. The interviews are really, the quotes extremely interesting. different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
I love that one of that some of the employees, are remembering him for the man he was, and you have Grandpa Zilligan in there who's remembering him for the
Yep.
kind of man he was. And that's actually what the author says, is that, Terry didn't die from the bullet wound. He died because of the kind of man he was. I
think that was the thesis. Yeah.
Yeah, really etched, in my mind. And, when Grandpa Z says, he was just a kid from the neighborhood, but there were 100 cars in the funeral procession, and that really stuck out to him. It's like,
yeah,
my boy had this like great effect on so many people, which continues, I think, and has continued to be a theme in the family, of people coming out of nowhere and saying, I knew Terry Zilligan. He was that guy in the neighborhood, which makes this even more shocking. Is he's larger than life. He was larger than life. And
but in Grandpa's words, he was just an ordinary kid.
Yeah. It's like so modest. It's like they're so like humble about it, but like they know. And I think I was trying to remember where exactly it was, but they were talking about how he was in the department store that day, and the friend came up. He was trying to sell something to someone, and the friend came up and was like, here's my card. And then he's like, this is my son from another marriage. Like his humor is so good. Like it's so dry and amazing. It's really, really nice to just know kind of who. And then the illiterate.
How about if we mention the robbery in the gas station,
Mhm.
which is something that is often, I don't know, overlooked or something, but when you started this research, that came back to my mind. Obviously it's in here in the write-up, and I thought, if he did know this, I'm not sure he even knew a robbery was going on when he started chasing D'Argento. I'm not sure, but because he was overpowered and tied up and locked in a bathroom while he was in charge of the gas station a couple years earlier by robbers, given the kind of personality he had, where he encountered that evil or that lack of morality, or that it in Peggy's view, just that like overwhelming selfishness, like give me that, that maybe that had made such an impact on him that it was one of the drivers in him running after. We'll never know. He's the only one who knows that.
Yeah. So true.
Corey, I never knew about that robbery.
We don't talk about it that much, right? It's overshadowed. Right.
And so when he came back from the Air Force, he worked at a gas station in Maywood on 9th and Lake.
Yep.
And was one night he was the sole attendant. I think I think it was 1959. That's what's coming to my head, but that doesn't sound right. I think it would have been 60. And two guys came in and put him in the bathroom and locked him in the bathroom and robbed the place. And so he was like humiliated, obviously, being a guy who was just overrun and locked in a bathroom. That's totally humiliating. And a guy like Terry, who, would actually like seek out anyone who would bully people in school and, beat them up. I mean, that's a scarring thing to happen.
Right.
So I think really, really, is not something to overlook in his motivations to step up that morning, but also that it was really ingrained in him to begin with, that he, was, as Mary says, like was always for the underdog, and I think that's just speaks to who he was. And do we all want to be that person for the underdog? Yes. Right. I think we all are in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
But then the scary side of that is, there's scary people out there.
That's
So
right. Right. And that makes you vulnerable because, when it comes to it, at that day in Sears, he was the only one who did anything. And this all happened in front of people. And they, watched LaJoy run toward him. People watched the whole thing unfold. And I understand it happened quickly, but he was the only one there, and the rest of it was just something that people did not take any action because most of us are learned to stay safe. Most of us learn to keep our heads down and to not take these kind of actions because they can have disastrous consequences as they do here.
I think honestly that's part of why this article's so long. I think it speaks to people that people want to think of themselves as that heroic person, that I would have done the right thing in that situation, but what he gave up was so big. I don't know that everyone would have done that, right? Obviously no one else did. No one else helped Terry.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like two people came and
Mm-hmm.
rushed to his aid. He was the only one, and I think that just speaks to people, and they want to read about it and they want to hear about it because I think it makes them feel better that there are people out there.
I agree with you. I think that is why it's
even
so
though you
long,
don't.
Peggy. Yeah.
Look, in today's world, people don't even make eye contact with you when
Right.
you walk past them.
True.
Nobody gets involved. We are very disassociated as a human species. There's no one like Terry Zilligan anymore. Nobody would have gotten involved like that today.
Nobody.
Which is,
Nobody.
I mean,
Yeah.
everyone would have either avoided it or ran away or hid, but no one would have stepped up. Because that's just the world we live in. There aren't Terry Zilligans anymore.
Right. And let's
Fortunately,
go right into, he's on D'Argento, right? He's got him pinned. And now he sees there's another guy with a gun. And, again, as you read further, you'll understand that this was not LaJoy running up in a split second and taking a quick shot. This went on for a while. And this is the really, really hard. He knew, and he didn't let go of D'Argento. LaJoy is circling them, trying to get a shot. This is in the tapes. He's trying to get a shot. And so Terry knows this. And D'Argento's yelling some horrible things, now obviously it didn't go on for 5 minutes, but it went on long enough where he could have rolled off and said, whatever, I'm out of here. And it was in his nature to complete these actions that he made the decision to take. Again, we may not see this very often in our world anymore or ever.
And I think no, that's very well said for sure. And I think it's another reason that we can appreciate the story of Terry all these years later, and others can appreciate it is this is like he's superhuman in all these ways, and so he really is like almost a superhero to us. And I think that's why sort of the myth and legend of Terry was so easy to glom onto, and I think is still really important that we all do kind of cling to that because it's all that really is left of him, even though it's it's complicated. But I mean, what a terrific legacy to have as
Yeah,
a person who left the world at 26. It being that. I
Yep.
also want to, as you have read the story about the crime, and as we're continuing to, I'm trying to as best I can to be an objective sort of arbiter of this story, in that there are, multiple potential culprits here, and as certainly we talk about the conspiracy that could have been, Michael LaJoy, and certainly there's a lot of merit to that. We have to also remember that the police had their person in mind too, so there's merit and examining Paul Painsko as a perpetrator as well. So to keep your mind open to that, as well as we continue to read and really just try to continue to, because I think that will just only help more and more to really understand
Okay.
who exactly it was. And so I would say, when you think about this crime and you think about what happened at Golf Mill Sears on March 14th, are these, in your opinion, professionals doing this job, or do these seem like amateurs? That's a very, very pivotal question, was a pivotal question for the police in figuring out who to pursue and investigate. And it is an important question for us today. Are these professionals, or are they amateurs? They're certainly prepared like professionals. They've got outfits and disguises that completely shrouded their identities. They kind of quickly were able to locate where the cash was. Then again, they stole I think it was about 20,000 in cash and like 30,000 in checks that they could not actually cash. So do professionals do that? Or is that more of a desperate amateur thing? Would a professional rob an extremely busy department store in the middle of a Saturday? I mean, think about, you guys were there at Sears. I didn't really go to Sears that much in my life, but Sears on a Saturday in 1964, you can imagine how many people were in there. Now, devil's advocate, would a professional do that because it's easier to get away and there's a lot of chaos going on? Or would an amateur have done that and just picked Saturday, to do it? It's something to consider as we continue to kind of understand who the perpetrators of this crime would be. And, what does the risk involved say about these criminals? And we'll read in part 2 about, particularly in part 2, when we read about Paul Painsko and his criminal career. What were his tendencies? Did he take risks like this? Or would this have been a crime that he would have scoffed at doing because of the kind of level of professional, which is weird to say about a burglar and a robber, level of professionalism, but he, was the best in the game. So would he have done something like this so brazen? So we'll kind of flesh that out as we go. And, I know it's 12 o'clock. I don't know if anyone has any time constraints, but certainly we can keep discussing here. I know we didn't really talk about part 1, but, if there's any other questions or discussions, just going to kind of leave the floor open. I don't have any time constraints. I'm here till whenever you guys are here. So.
Tom, I had some questions about this Richard Kane fellow. I guess I forgot from a couple of weeks ago. He
Sure.
was a made man, and yet he was also still in Ogilvy's administration.
Correct. He was actually a made man, and he approached Sam Giancana when he was a young man and said, "Look, I want to be your guy." He looked up to the outfit members, and he also kind of had this desire to be a cop. So he wanted to have the best of both worlds. Giancana said to him, "Work your way up. And by the time I work my way up to be boss, we can work together." And that's exactly what happened. And so he was Richard Ogilvy's man. And
How so?
so Ogilvy
What
hired
did he
him.
do?
Yeah, good question. Ogilvy hired Kane to be head of the Special Investigations Unit, which were kind of like big crimes and a lot of actually syndicate crimes. So he would actually be investigating the syndicate, but then of course he was being paid by the syndicate, by the outfit at the same time. So truly a double dealer. And what he would actually do is, for a while, under, while he was working for Ogilvy, anybody who wasn't paying tributes to the outfit and had a little gambling ring or a little prostitution ring or some kind of criminal escapade out there, and they weren't giving the kickbacks to the outfit, he was going and taking them down, getting press on the police side that they had taken down let's say a gambling ring. But that was helping the outfit because the outfit wasn't getting anything from that gambling ring. And so they wanted them out anyway. So it was this really, really evil kind of cycle that
And
they were.
so Ogilvy was impressed by that?
Ogilvy, yeah. So Kane was for all intents and purposes, a good at making arrests and had a good record. And then also got on Ogilvy's kind of like, I think, good side early, and saw Ogilvy as somebody who would eventually make a rise to the top. And so Kane kept really close with Ogilvy as Ogilvy was developing his political career, to the point that by the time he became sheriff in 1962, sorry, some of these years I'm like trying to parse through, but 62, he hired Kane immediately as his guy to head that unit, not knowing, or allegedly not knowing, that he was in with the mob. This would all been very like under the table connection with Kane and the mob.
This is like Martin Scorsese stuff, The Departed. That's exactly what this is.
Wow. Yeah.
Real life. You're right. It's like I said, some of this stuff, once you start digging in, you're like, how did this happen? And how is it involved with our grandfather? But it is, and I think the good thing about what I'll give you all to read for next time we meet, which will be in the new year, which is crazy to say the new year, but in the new year, will be the rest of part one, where we really will be introduced to Richard Kane and his beginnings, which is kind of what I just discussed a little bit. But we'll give you insight into that as well. So hopefully, you all be able to just get a little bit more understanding of who all these people are and how they interact, as opposed to me just sitting here explaining and talking at you about it. So.
Tom, I just had a question about the grocery run. I forget which chapter that is, but that information that you have about what happened when they got back to the grocery store and they were covering things, where did you get that information?
Yeah, so that will be chapter 2. So that's a great question. It will be the first chapter, or it'll be it's the second chapter after. So if you read it, I know it's kind of tempting to get it right and keep reading it. So that is all from the testimony of the 2 barn bosses back in the jail that John Shields went and got a tape recording of. They were the ones who were told this story, allegedly. You're going to keep being that objective arbiter here. Allegedly told by Michael LaJoy and Joseph DiArgento. Here's what happened at Sears. We killed this guy. Here's what happened after. We ran to Michael LaJoy's grocery store. We went down in the basement. Patrick Shanks smashed the gun with a hammer, took all the pieces, and hid them out throughout the neighborhood. Start throwing them in garbage cans in the sewer. Now, that is a detail, and one of many details that these barn bosses, Tajra and Felici, bring up, that I don't know about you, are really hard to just be able to imagine and think up on your own. And that gives to me a credibility to them and their ability, their recounting of these events, these secondhand recounting of events that they've gotten from LaJoy and DiArgento that really, really kind of make you wonder and pause. So you'll see at the top of that chapter that I do say that the following is based on an alleged recounting of events, and that's important. So that I'm not trying to bias the audience and bias any of you by saying this is what happened, because sure, we have a hand account of this, but we have to remember that there's other things that could have happened here, other people who could have been part of this situation. So that's the best information we have.
On the other hand, tell me if I'm mistaken here, Tom. When Lieutenant Dennis got in his car 6 hours later and came, on the basis of an anonymous phone call, and drove to that store to pick up LaJoy and question him, wasn't there some kind of report that he saw like burning plastic in the sink and talked to the what am I thinking of?
No, it's a good question, but so I think where that's coming from is the police questioned LaJoy's employees, basically, even though I think his dad owned the store. They questioned, hey, was he here in the store today? And they said, yeah, he was here. Later in the 68 trial, those employees came forward and said, we lied.
Wow. Yeah.
He was not there that morning. And who got those statements from those employees?
Richard Kane. Okay.
So he was trying to discredit LaJoy as a witness against him in that trial. And said, okay, what's his alibi for Sears? It's these two employees. Let me go talk to them. And they were like, yeah, we want to recount these statements. Now, the challenge for you as the reader and consumer of this story is Richard Kane the kind of guy who would go in and be able to strong arm and influence these guys, manipulate these two old employees enough to the point where they would retract their statements and not, even if they're not telling the truth? That could be as well. It doesn't mean that Richard Kane is an all-time double dealer.
Yeah.
That you have to remember.
Okay.
It happens. But yeah, they said that was one of the specific things that was also said, was that they took the clear plastic face masks off and they burned them in the sink downstairs. I don't know who is good of a liar that they could actually like make something like that up. But it would be pretty epic lie if that were possible. So
that kind of corroborates with the story from the barn bosses too.
Yes,
them destroying the evidence. So it's certainly probable.
Well, and it seems like nobody who was investigating on the day. Everything that I've read, and I think it's in this piece that Tom has up too, says their faces were somehow disfigured, but nobody really knew how. And this is the answer to that. They had on clear plastic masks.
Correct. In out of deference to kind of part two and how it's all laid out there, and much better laid out than I can explain it verbally, I will say that's all kind of laid out in the second part.
Okay.
We'll read the rest of part one through the holidays, and hopefully be able to come back and chat about that. But
okay.
Yeah.
Famous.
So yeah, we'll talk about just really quickly too, just about Let me pull this up here. New share. 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen here. So this is from an article, a Tribune article, I believe. And that is a stain that unfortunately I put there one night. So sorry about sorry about that. But kind of shows you the actual hallway where Terry was tackled. You'll see to the right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. There are lamps here. And the lamps were actually part of the story that the barn bosses recounted, was that they knocked over lamps in the scuffle. And so when you see the lamps here, you're like, again, another very credible fact to that recounting of events. So there's this article here. This is where the vaulting bandit kind of came over, stepped onto this wheeled cart, and then jumped over into the cashier's cage. That's the cashier's cage to the left. And then ran down the aisle and was tackled by Terry. Another kind of main sort of historical aspect to this is the front page of the Chicago Tribune the day after the day after the robbery murder. Was everyone knows who Jack Ruby was.
Yeah.
This is the main headline is that Ruby was sentenced to death for killing Lee Harvey Oswald. And in talking with some family members about Terry himself, I think he was really moved by the John F. Kennedy assassination story and how tragic it is that certainly this was kind of the news of that day, was Jack Ruby, and thinking about John F. Kennedy, this kind of pure figure for the most part, who was, shot dead in this extremely tragic way. It kind of mirrors what happened to Terry. And I think it's so tragic that, he would obviously never think that that was going to be his fate in the end. But I'm sure Terry looked at John F. Kennedy and his assassination as something that was also so, morally awful and
Yes.
just an awful thing to happen in our world. And so trying to act out in those same kind of ways, and being brave and heroic in different ways like Kennedy was, is just is an interesting parallel, I think, historically.
Yeah.
It's while reading this, I was struck by, my dad always seemed to kind of correlate those two events. I mean, they did happen close in time, and it was I'm wondering also if that didn't have something to do with the long article about him too. Like, the country was already suffering from this huge shock
Right.
that no one really thought about before, to have a president assassinated. I think if that happened today, we would be as shocked. But back then, it was such a big event. And then to have this happen to their family so close in time, and so similar in the fact that you have like this kind of heroic figure, and they leave his family behind, and how sad it is. Those are connected in at least my dad's memory of them. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's really another way to like process it all too. Just, hey, buddy. Cool tractor pajama.
I will.
And yeah, it's seriously it's just a crazy parallel. And here's another, this I know came from your dad, Peggy, kept this article. This Dillinger type gang found active here. I'm trying to make this a little bit larger. I think that should do it. No, not really. This is a physical article that I have that I've scanned. But this goes into kind of the discussion we were having about, is this a professional gang or a group of amateurs? And again, kind of the way of the public processing it is, John Dillinger, the 20s and 30s. Like this is a Dillinger gang,
Yeah.
So they go into this article and they say that there's some parallel crimes that have happened throughout the suburbs where 4 gunmen kind of go into these. One's a Piggly Wiggly, one's a bank. The Franklin Park Bank is not mentioned in here, but is really, it just gives insight into what the police were thinking at the time. Who did this and how. And so some of the police, I think, are on record by saying, yeah, these are professionals. And there's one detective that I think is in the Portrait of a Dead Hero article who says, yeah, I mean, if you looked around the store for a couple hours, you'd be able to figure out how they handed off the money bag to Brinks, et cetera, and all that. So that probably could have been an amateur. So it's not letting me sort of open this article too much. There we go. Mom, you're mentioned here about the Lake Michigan, jumping into Lake Michigan. I think they probably, they obviously remembered that story and wrote about it, that, when he jumped into Lake Michigan to save you when you were 2, when their older daughter, Mary Corinne, was 2, Terry saved her from drowning. They were walking around Lake Michigan seawall and she fell into the water 20 feet deep. Terry plunged in and had her out again before she sank for the first time. Glad that didn't happen, for the record. Yeah, so just it gives a little insight into Terry, which I'm grateful for, that they are telling Terry's story as they're kind of about the investigation here too, which is really a goal of this manuscript too, and in our work is really to just continue to highlight.
It's so interesting the way that and this is reminiscent of some of the things Peggy has brought up, how the media are at first, like they're the inset to a Dillinger type gang story is about Terry's character. Like what is that? What's the symbolism of that? Is it because at the same time that the country is still reeling, to use your good verb, from the assassination of Kennedy, who everybody or many people considered to be, a really good man who was a president. Are we following in that kind of a, way of setting up the story? Because that's very interesting to have a crime article with an inset about its victim.
A good point. Very good point.
You're right. A lot of times these stories don't even speak of the victims. And this,
No.
He's got a picture, and
yeah,
I do think the story is so compelling. Like, how can you not hear about this? This victim is not your typical victim, right? It's such an act of heroism that.
Well, and one of the things that's not typical is that the victim is named and seen and brought into everything. And as you say, I mean, with the, what we know and what we live through constantly with all of these mass shootings is that the focus goes immediately on the shooter and, off the victims.
I do want to take a second too, and we could certainly come back to this, but in this same vein and in that light, I did want to share, I brought up that I had Terry's letters home from Air Force last week. So I did actually want to just stop and read a couple of those just to kind of remember Terry and remember who he was. It certainly, we can get into any of this stuff as well. I want to start with some of his just 2 of his early letters that I enjoyed from when he, as it says here, was in camp with the Philadelphia Phillies, at spring training. And so he, this was April 3rd, 1956. Dear folks, I'm so sore I feel like I got run over by a locomotive. The bottom of my feet feel like I've been jumping out of trees. Boy, I know in a few days I'll feel great, but right now, ugh. Cy Morgan is the camp director, and he really is a card. The managers are great guys, and the pitchers coaches, Dale Jones and Ben Tincup, really know their business. I learned today that a D-class team is the hardest to make. We're constantly reminded that the first year is the toughest. It's a hell of a grind, but I know I've impressed the coaches, not so much with speed as my control and form. I'm really giving the game some effort, but I'm going to open up wide that first practice game. So as of now, I believe you'll be seeing me in Mattoon. I've heard our manager, Benny Zentura, say our camp looks better than the C Club. We have really got some big guns with the trunk. My buddy Dick from Oshkosh hit one 300 feet drive in practice yesterday. Good luck, Tom, in your season. You got a lot to learn, but so have I. Mow them down, Red. I'm thirsty now, so I'm going down to get something to drink. Bubble, bubble. They have great ginger ale down here. It tastes a hell of a lot like a highball. Well, I'm going to get some milk and one of those fake highballs. So bye-bye, be good all. God bless every one of you. Love from your son and brother, Terry. Another one here. This is from 2 weeks later. Hi, folks. Yesterday we had a dust storm and near tornado winds. We had to cut practice short when it started, and we were forced off the road by terrific winds and blinding dust. Large signs of debris were being blown around Laurenburg. Everything in this room is thickly covered with dust. Today, I'll be one of the starters. We had a game yesterday, and 2 of my 3 buddies hit triples. I umpired the game and gave everyone a laugh with my professional, "You're out." I got razzed for my enthusiasm and queer stance. It was fun, and I enjoyed it. Last night, 4 of us were sitting here, all getting a hell of a laugh out of old Jimmy's letter. Good kid. Neil from Chicago nearly fractured us with his impersonation of me getting out of bed in the morning. Adios, familia. Love from that lazy lefty. So I don't think he broke camp with the Phillies, which is unfortunate. With all his injuries, it makes a lot of sense. But then, so you can see there's this letter on the 15th of 56, and then August 56, the next letter, he's at Air Force Base. So
Yeah.
kind of see the history there in those 2 letters. And then by 59, he is rounding out his experience in the Air Force, and his wife is joined him in England, our Mary. And so these are some good letters that I wanted to share too. February 9th, 59. Don't worry about my back, Mom. It's done me more good than harm, and it is steady getting strong. Moo, who is Mary, he calls her Moo, and she called him Two. Moo and Two. Moo and I had another party, but the hotel next door didn't care for it. We sang Silvery Moon, Mill Stream, Harvest Moon, I Want a Girl, and lots of other oldies. The police were there the next morning, but we didn't answer the door till they came a second time. I told them next time we'd sing on key. My old wife keeps me smiling, and I for her. Blondie and Jill are fine, and we got a boot out of their little blokes. We going to have a hell of a party the 21st with 3 English couples. We'll have a ball. So they didn't even care at all about the police. They're just ready for the next one. Boo has volunteered to work for the Air Force Family Assistance Program. She'll be a receptionist to see that new families get settled okay and that family emergencies are aided. I'm writing a short story for an Air Force contest. One is bound to be kicked out. It'll be an Air Force story, and I know they won't like it. I haven't done much with the novel. It's such a huge job. It scares me. I know it's senseless to write on a subject that you don't have basic knowledge of, so I'm reading pertinent books to attach an intellectual point of view. I hope to have a short story done in 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll send you a copy. I'm sure glad to hear Dick is doing okay. I hate to see him hurting with all his responsibilities. I've already mailed in my tax, Ma. Well, Lent is nearly here. Moo is giving up sweets, and I'm quitting smoking. I really enjoy a pipe full at times. I've been going to Mass during the week, and I hope to go as much as possible during Lent. I sure think a lot of this new Pope, John. He's got brains, zest, and God's blessing. I hope all is serene at home, and I really hope that all my brothers take my forward letters with the meaning that they were written with. You guys just have an odd bird for a sibling, and you have to make the best of it. Trust my parents aren't in any state of confusion over or about their Anglo-Saxon link. In case you are, let me know why so I can further add to my chaotic being and keep you guessing. Well, I guess I like it. It's just, these are just so amazing. And this,
Now we know where Uncle Jim gets it.
I cannot look at this. This is the drawing that he accompanied this letter with. Hello world, what's happening? So that it does look like a Jim. That looks like a Jim birthday card right there. I'll always love to write my home and tell him what's this loss. A letter's not as good as phone, but in an easier dose, I send our love by written word. Which never are too clear, but all is well, not to fear, you're safe, for I am here. Con mucho amor, tu and mu. And then these are other drawings, Jim and Barb.
Oh my God.
And then this one, which is like, I don't know, Popeye or something.
Yeah.
So there's him and Mary, tu and mu, love and abundance, tu and mu. So really, really like those. Those are, you know, a couple I wanted to share this morning, and maybe we can keep doing that to just to keep his.
Yeah. You know,
spirit alive.
next time we do it, let's find those letters where Bobby sends actual bicycles to them. It's around this time, and it changes their whole experience over there, because they don't, you know, they kind of stuck in Huntington. So that would really be cool.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. There they are.
There's the benefit of having these transcribed is you just can throw left these.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be okay if I got a copy of that?
Oh, for sure.
If it is, okay, that'd be great.
Oh, for sure. I have them all.
These remind me of my dad's letters and Jimmy's letters, so. Which I assume Tommy's letters too, if I would have ever gotten one.
Very nice. Yes. Certainly we'll send these links along. Have them on Google Drive. So
yeah, that'd be great, Tom. That'd be great.
So this seems like a natural time to wrap up, unless anybody has any other questions or discussions. I know we're about an hour and a half. Wanted to try to make a time in the future, about a month from now. I would suggest January 14th, a Sunday, kind of in the middle of January there. It'll be after the holidays. It'll give everyone the holidays to finish part one, which is about 12 pages. So 12 pages over a month. Hope that's not too strenuous for everyone. And also wanted to encourage everybody to listen to the podcast pilot episode as well, if you have not, to just continue to give you more of a sense of the overall story. So January 14th, unless there's any objections, we'll talk about the rest of part one, a little bit about the podcast pilot, and have more of a discussion. Certainly read some of these letters as well. Is that good with everybody?
Very good. Thank you for getting us
Good here, darling.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm thrilled that everybody came back. And thanks to this core group. We're terrific. And for Olivia for joining us.
Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah,
my pleasure. This is great, Tom. You're a great writer. I had to hold back from just reading the entire part one yesterday, because you have great narrative.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Very talented.
Thank you, Mosey Poe.
The 14th, I won't be able to make that one, Tom, but I'm gonna be in Chicago that weekend. But we'll
you'll
talk
be in
more.
Chicago.
So,
in this apartment, maybe at this apartment.
mm.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, we'll chat. If there's a better alternative date too for anyone, maybe we'll think about the 7th, or if there's a better time that weekend, we can meet. It's totally amenable. So
Okay.
Let me know. And again, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I will now, especially just here with you guys and going through this stuff. So
All
cheers.
right. Thanks, darlings.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everyone.
Good to see
Happy
everyone.
holidays.
Bye, everybody.
Happy holidays. Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye. Love you.
Bye. Love you.